Well, thanks everyone for your attention. Let's get into our first session. Our first presenter is Dr. Scott Daniel. Scott is a senior lecturer in humanitarian engineering, a former high school mathematics and science teacher. He has worked in 10 countries in 5 continents and as a consultant and facilitator with UNESCO, Australian Volunteers International Development, Engineers Without Borders, Unbound, Macquarie Leadership Program, World Vision, University of Sydney, Victorian Department of Education Training, and the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority. Clearly a lot of experience he brings to the table today. His current research focuses on the development of socio-technical thinking and co-design expertise in the context of humanitarian engineering and humanitarian engineering education and practice in general. Thanks so much for joining us today, Scott, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Matt. I'll just get my slides sharing with you so you can see. And yeah, thank you for the kind introduction. I'm going to be talking through what appears in humanitarian design. So also just wanted to echo the acknowledgement of country that Matt gave earlier. I'm dialing in from Bidjigal and Gadigal country, and so I want to pay respects to the traditional owners, recognizing that it always has been and always will be Aboriginal land. So I've mentioned socio-technical thinking, and this is going to be the focus of what I'm talking about today. And it's about recognizing that engineering work and a lot of professional work is about integrating social and technical dimensions into solving some sort of ill-defined or wicked problem. And a few years ago, with a colleague, Andrea Mazurko, I conducted some research trying to unpack what this really means in practice. And what we did is we developed this scenario, which I'll just give you a moment to read. And we gave that scenario to both novice engineers. So this was first year engineering students in their first, I think we did it in the very first week of their degree. So they're very keen on engineering, but were very inexperienced just at the start of their engineering journey. And we also gave it to experienced practitioners, researchers, academics in humanitarian engineering. And we asked them the following questions. So with this scenario, what considerations do you need to take into account to solve this problem? And we got a lot of different responses. So here's a representative student response, and you might think about how you would answer that question. But the considerations that the student identified were things like how many people can use the device at the same time, how many hours a day would you need it, and so on. And it's interesting to compare that with one of the expert responses that we got. So, I mean, one thing you might notice initially is that the expert response is a lot longer. That wasn't always the case, but when you dig a little bit deeper, you can see that they actually explored a much broader range of considerations. So I've highlighted some of the ones here. So the student was really focused on technical aspects, like how many lights will this design power, for example. And the expert recognized the importance of those questions as well. What materials can you make it out of? How will you store the energy, and so on. But what was really interesting is that the experts went beyond just technical considerations to also think about, well, how would people be involved and how would they be a part of the co-design process? And more broadly, are there ethical issues? Are there social norms that come into play? And so we found that experts identified considerations around the technical aspects, but also about the engagement of stakeholders and broader contextual issues. And so we developed this model for thinking about socio-technical considerations that distinguish between considerations regarding technology, such as how does the device actually work? How do you maintain it? What are some of the design constraints? But also, how are stakeholders involved? and what are some of the broader contextual considerations around ethics, law, or local cultural or gender or social norms, or other what we call socio-material contexts, which might include things like economy, or politics. And in general, what was interesting is that if we distinguish between these three dimensions, if you like, of socio-technical thinking, that people that came in with as novices focused almost solely on the technical aspects, whereas experienced or expert practitioners gave equal kind of attention to considerations of stakeholder engagement, as well as broader contextual considerations, not only just technical aspects. I won't go into this slide in detail, but I can share the source of it with you later. But in this slide, we kind of unpacked what do all of those different things mean. So, for example, for technical inputs, it was, well, what materials are available? How much power do you need? How much power can you generate? Versus functional aspects of how easy the device is to use and friction and so on, or how to maintain it. But also, the other two dimensions that were equally important was the involvement of people at a collaborative level, as predicated on building long-term relationships, as well as these, like what we broke into three different categories of broader considerations, a broader context around local norms, laws and ethics, and kind of a catch-all other. And what we concluded is that someone who's an expert in socio-technical thinking considers all those dimensions. And a phrase that I find is helpful to kind of capture this point with students, and I think is valuable to share here today, is that engineering is never done in the abstract. It's never done in a decontextualized way, even though sometimes in our education curriculum we pretend that it is. But in reality, engineering is always done by people, it's done with people, and it's done for people. And with my students, and as a kind of provocation for the audience here today, I'd like to challenge you to think about, when thinking about complex problems that face us, to not only think about the technical aspects of how we might address them, but how we might engage stakeholders in a collaborative way, and how we might incorporate broader contextual considerations. So you might be interested where we got the idea for that scenario in the first place, and I don't have time to talk about it today, but I'll share these slides afterwards, and you might be interested to look at more details of this story. But it's the play pump was the inspiration for the scenario, and it's a really interesting kind of fable, if you like, about how we can sometimes get seduced by the technical aspects of a solution and think that will lead to a panacea, whereas if we don't, what the kind of after effects of that, and if you look at that video, it's really interesting. You'll see when stakeholders aren't engaged, and there's limited engagement with broader contextual considerations, that such technical designs don't always succeed. So that's a really quick introduction to some of the research I've done around conceptualizing socio-technical thinking, and I've got a couple of links there where you can see the more detail of the research that we've done. And please feel free to reach out with any follow-up or questions or comments. Would love to be in touch. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and happy to take any questions if we have a few minutes.
Thanks very much for that. It's a very interesting approach for humanitarian engineering. We do have some questions from the audience. How would you define successful collaboration in your sector, and what do you think is required to make long-lasting positive impact?
Wow,
it's a bit of a tricky one.
So the first one was how do you
define collaboration, and how do you think we can make long-lasting impact in the sector?
Yeah, long-lasting impact. I think the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about collaboration is listening and more broadly cultural humility, which I take to mean not presuming that our culture is the best or is universally correct or should is the arbiter of truth, but that we can be open to different perspectives and not presume that our way is the best. And I think that's that's more of an embodied attitude or an approach to how we interact with people, that and maybe is also summed up by the phrase seek first to understand rather than to be understood. So I think coming in with an open mind, checking our assumptions, being open to different perspectives is kind of a necessary precursor for building collaborations, and maybe part of that as well is having a strengths-based approach and recognizing what value we can bring to a collaboration, but what value equally as important, what value the people that we're collaborating with bring, like what value they bring, and what we can learn from them. So I think that's what's most important in collaboration. And I managed to forget your second question. I think it was around long-term impact.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, you asked them as a double barrel question, but I think they're actually very closely related. Coming in like short term with a great idea that's only in our heads and just presuming that we can change the world, so to speak, is a recipe for failure. And I think coming in with an expectation that that you don't have all the answers, that you're open to working with other people and learning from their perspectives and building long-term relationships are the key factors for success, both in collaboration and then ultimately that successful collaboration leads to successful outcomes. So I think that they're very much tied together.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. Thank you very much for that. We have one more quick follow-up question if you have time. In relation to, there's a lot of younger early career professionals or students that try to make an impact in this world, and we're faced with more and more information as the time progresses, so you're much more aware of all the ethical challenges that you do face. And yourself as practitioner in the humanitarian field, you have clearly decided on a path and trying to make an impact. What advice would you give to younger people to choose the area of where they can make an impact, since there's so many problems in the world today?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting just reflecting as you're kind of posing that question about the decisions that I've made and what advice I'd give. And I think one quote or one like insight that I found helpful is actually from Voltaire, and in the conclusion of his book Candide, and translated in English, I haven't read the French, but it's something like cultivate your own garden. And what I take that to mean is that we can be disheartened by looking out upon all the inequity and suffering in the world and be daunted by it and what we can actually contribute ourselves. And what solace I take from that quote is that we can focus on the good that we can do that's in front of us. The work that we do, it doesn't have to be at kind of the front line, so to speak, of humanitarian work. We can still bring a humanitarian mindset and a socio-technical thinking and a collaborative mindset to all the work that we do, and we can address the things that we have agency over. So no one of us is going to save the world, as it were, but we can still do good within the scope that's available to us. So that would be my advice, and it kind of comes back to a little bit of humility and a little bit of humility to kind of like recognize that I only have power over this one thing, but I can do this well and I can add value to this and I can bring kindness and goodness to what I have influence over. So that's what I aspire to do. And that quote of cultivating my own garden has helped me think about that.
I love that quote. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. It's going to be great to pass that on.